I'm going to stop. Well, good morning and welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is part of a series focusing on the recently developed curriculum in sustainable resource management. This curriculum was commissioned as part of the Doing What Matters program by David Esmaili, the Deputy Sector Navigator for Energy, Water, and Materials. The course curriculum features an instructor guidebook, resources, and 21 lesson plans with PowerPoints covering materials management, recycling, composting, reuse, and zero waste activities that focus on promoting upstream reduction of wasteful practices and materials consumption and disposal. Today's webinar is part one of a four-part series designed to provide an overview of the curriculum for faculty and administrators interested in offering the course. Parts 2 through 4 will feature the subject matter expert content developers and provide information on some of the more complex topics covered in the curriculum. Each lesson and each webinar that we do will provide for Q&A time so that attendees can ask questions relative to the topics being presented. Today's class will focus on an overview of the Sustainable Resource Management curriculum and what instructor resources are included in the guide. We will provide a brief overview of the first 8 lessons, which focus mostly on the basics of recycling, reuse, waste reduction, zero waste, and material management and tracking. The 3 future webinars are going to focus on more specific topics, and those are going to include the zero waste, greenhouse gas, and the organics and composting. All right, so my name is Judy Gregory, and I'll be presenting today's lesson. I'm the owner of Go2Zero Strategies Group, and I've worked in the solid waste and recycling field for over 25 years. My experience does include a number of different industry sectors, but most recently I've been focused on developing industry-related training and certification programs, including this program, which was developed on behalf of West Valley College. I've also worked with the U.S. Zero Waste Business Council in developing the Zero Waste Business Associate Certification Program, and also a professional development program on behalf of the California Resource Recovery Association. I recently launched greeneducation.us, which is an educational portal for sustainability professionals. My business was actually awarded Small Business of the Year by the California Small Business Administration in 2013 and Recycler of the Year in 2007. So I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation, but before we do, what I would like to do is just show you a couple things about your panel. You should have a panel on your screen that looks similar to this, and we will be doing some Q&A throughout the day. So what you can do is you can go ahead and either type questions into the question box, or you can use the little raise hand up here to raise your hand, and I'll know to call on you. It'll alert me. So that would be 2 ways that we would handle the Q&A, whatever you feel more comfortable with, either asking questions or typing them. It's a little easier, especially if you have more complex questions, if you just go ahead and raise your hand and let everybody hear you ask your question. All right. One of the things I want to do before we get started is just do a quick poll to find out who we have on the call with us. So I've got 2 quick polls, and if you could go ahead and just answer these. The first one, I just want you to tell me a little bit about you. Are you administrator, faculty, student, or business? If you could go ahead and just respond to that poll for me, so on the back end I know who is here on our call. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that poll, and then I have one more poll for you that I would like is just to give me an idea of your experience in sustainable resource management, recycling, zero waste, composting, organics management, any of those areas. If you don't really have any experience working or instructing in this field, let me know. But if you have more experience, that would be great to know. So if you could go ahead and I'm launching this poll, just let me know quickly your experience level. That would be great as well. I'll give everybody another second or 2 to go ahead and register on that. And then before we get started, I just want to let you know that I've had a little bit of background noise. I've had a number of people join and not mute themselves. And so sorry about that, I've gotten distracted a few times, but if you could just go ahead and make sure to mute yourself while you're on the call so that it doesn't, any background noise doesn't affect any of the attendees, that would be great. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to briefly, this lesson is going to be a little bit different than the other three that we'll be offering. The other three lessons are going to be much more specific on the topics. This lesson, I want to make sure that we briefly cover the instructional resources provided for the faculty that'll be teaching and to kind of talk about how to use the guide, because I think that's a really important part of what we're doing. So there is an instructor guide. It's over 300 pages that's provided as part of this curriculum. And what the guide includes is it includes all lesson plans. There's 21 lessons, which include the 21 PowerPoints. And those PowerPoints have slide-by-slide instructor notes, which is very helpful. It has a capstone project outline. We have homework and assignments outlined. We have sample course syllabus. We have a number of handouts and worksheets, and we have a glossary of terms in there. Okay. And then the lesson plans are all very specific. So each lesson plan provides a lesson description. It provides the student learning outcomes. It has classroom activities included, a huge number of student resources, and we refer to these as student resources, but I really think that they're just as much instructor resources. So as you're kind of diving into this material, definitely review all those resources, lots of videos, articles, websites, other pieces of information that will really help you supplement the content that you're presenting. And then, as I mentioned, we have the PowerPoints with the slide-by-slide narratives. We have quite a few in-class discussions throughout the PowerPoints, and then we have lots of activities and worksheets included for you. So this really is an all-inclusive curriculum that we've created that probably might even have more material than you would actually be able to get through, depending on how many weeks or months your class is. But we wanted to make sure that we really provided a broad range of materials for you. All right, so I just want to show you really quick what a lesson plan looks like. Like I said, there's your lesson description. It's going to tell you what you cover. The student learning outcomes are the things, obviously, the takeaways that the students will have. A number of classroom activities. Some of them are very short. Some of them are longer. And then a list of resources. And then we have reading material. And the reading material, it's up to each instructor to decide which of the reading materials they have the students review prior to class, which would be more like a homework component to it down there. All right, and then here's the instructor slide-by-slide notes. So this is really going to provide content and narrative on each slide within the PowerPoint that's been provided to help you understand. And one of the things that we do is we do cite a number of the resources where the material and the content was pulled from. So if you have questions and wanted to do, maybe there are certain aspects of the content that you wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, you would have resources in there to let you know where to find out more information. Classroom activities are highlighted in blue, as you can see over here. So it's places where you'll be actually sort of breaking from the PowerPoint to do a discussion or an activity with the class. And then we have case studies that are in red. So when you get to the red, those are basically examples of real world activities related to the content that's being presented. All right, so just some of the details of the lesson plan. We have a section on assignments and reading. And so this gives you a whole overview of the entire course of the assignments and reading that will be provided, just so that as an instructor, you can look at that in advance and develop your syllabi to really match that. Handouts and worksheets are exercises that you would either do in class or can provide as homework assignments. There's a few of each, so you would just review those in advance and decide which ones you want to pass out and how to assign those. We do attach them to specific lesson plans, so some of them we want you to do in advance and some of them you would do after the class, so just pay attention to those notes. And then here's, I think this is really huge, and this is probably one of the most exciting pieces of the curriculum, is that it is real world based. And we have created a capstone project that really gives students taking this class a hands-on, very interactive, very real world project that they will do. And it connects all of the 21 lessons so that as students walk through the lessons, they complete a different piece of the capstone project so that by the end, as you start to get to the end of your class, they will have compiled this project and they will be working together in groups. So it should be quite expansive because you've got different students providing different components to the project. And by the time they're done, they've really learned a lot about zero waste and sustainable resource management, but as well, they've actually completed a project that can go on a resume and really give them some experience that they might not get just in a regular classroom setting. So we have 2 capstone projects, and depending on the size of your class, if you have a smaller class, maybe 6 to 10, maybe 6 to 12 students, you might want to, as an instructor, just select one of the capstone projects. But if you do have a larger audience in your class, I'm going to say over 10 students, over 12 students, you might want to do one community project and one business project. And you would just ask students, those students that are more interested in local government, policy, working within their community, maybe nonprofit, would probably prefer to work in a community project. And those students that are focused on business aspects or entrepreneurial aspects of their career might want to focus on the business project. And so basically they will complete this project as they go throughout, and you will see references in each lesson plan showing how the lesson ties into the capstone project and what aspects students should be working on. So, all right. So with that, we are going to go ahead and get into an overview of the topics. And this curriculum is, as we've noted, on sustainable resource management, which really encompasses a large variety of sort of sub-industries, organics, local government, zero waste, in just business, working within your communities. But what I'm going to cover today is really more of an overarching discussion of lessons 1 through 8, hence very brief, and kind of talking about the foundation for sustainable resource management. Then some of the more intricate topics that we have, like zero waste, organics, and greenhouse gas, are going to be covered specifically and a little bit more depth by the developers who created those components. I'll go ahead and open up for questions if you have any, probably every 2 to 3 lessons. And if you have questions, like I said, just go ahead and type those in the box. So lesson 1 is the introduction to sustainable resource management, and really what is SRM. And throughout my lesson, what I'll do is I'll just show you what, I do like to show you what things we cover in the lesson. So our student learning outcomes, key areas, is we just want to make sure students know the materials in an SRM system, some of the data, what is meant by that term, identify why wasting occurs, and to kind of be able to understand what materials remain in the waste stream. We have a number of activities and resources, and one of the things that I always love to do when I'm starting is show the story of stuff. It's a 25-minute short video that really kind of gives that quick view of what we're going to be talking about, and Annie Leonard does a great job of narrating that. We also give students industry terms. We give them some resources and articles to read that are very sort of basic information as we're starting off on the topic. We have a couple reading materials, and then we have a few assignments that we like to provide where we like students to start looking at how other states, other countries, other communities handle waste and resources. And then we're going to be talking about some of the basics. So first thing we talk about, what is SRM? And SRM, Sustainable Resource Management, is waste reduction, reuse, recycling, or composting with the goal of working towards zero waste. And it's very important that we talk about the hierarchy because I think recycling is very common. It's something tangible that people, understand, but sustainable resource management and zero waste are really focused on upstream and reducing waste before we create it. So how is waste or garbage created? Well, it really is, it's a more modern concept, and it has to do with us, mixing all sorts of materials together and throwing them away and not really taking the time to manage those resources effectively to either reduce them in the first place or see how we can reuse them. So what happens is when we throw even a recyclable in a trash can and it gets compacted, in this mechanism, and we take it to a landfill, then we have effectively made it very challenging for that resource, even recyclable, compostable, highly reusable and valuable materials, to then be separated and make their way back into being either reused or recycled. Okay, so we have a video in here that you could share with your students, and we want you to start the conversation. What are things that you use that you normally throw away, and how could you eliminate that? So in the very beginning classes, we want to make it personal. We want students to start identifying with sustainable resource management in their own personal life, which will then help them look broader and start to figure out, okay, well, these are the things I'm doing. How does this affect my community? How does this affect my place of work? And how can I make changes on a broader scale? So those are things that we're going to really start to connect the dots with the students. Other things we want to do is we want to share with them the materials in the waste stream. So this is municipal solid waste generation in California, and we primarily are going to be giving you California-based data. Actually, this is EPA. Sorry about that. This is national. We do give you California-based data as well. But the things that we want to point out is that of the solid waste stream, there is still a huge amount of material, and my screen is auto-advancing. I apologize for that. There's still a huge amount of recyclable, compostable, valuable resources being thrown away. Lots of paper, lots of organics, lots of yard trimming. So these are highly divertible materials from landfills and incinerators with proper education and with information about these types of programs and really just the expansion of program availability. So we're going to share some of this information with students so that they understand what's in there. And then we're going to share another way to look at the resources as well. So it's one thing to identify material as paper or plastics, but one of the things that we've really identified in the last few years is what are those paper, plastic, glass, metal materials? Well, a lot of it is containers and packaging. It's materials that have a very short lifespan. They are used to package a product, get it to its destination where it's sold, and then they generally come into the household and are disposed immediately. And a lot of this packaging is really unnecessary. Obviously, packaging is needed to protect products and to make sure that products get to you unbroken and unspoiled. But oftentimes packaging is also used for marketing, and so you can see very small products packaged in very large boxes for that marketing purpose, and these are things that we want to bring to the audience's awareness. So then we ask students just to try and think about, what materials do they think are still being disposed. The other connection that we really want to make is the landfill and incineration connection. We cover that a lot more in the zero waste components of it, but we do get into that in the beginning. Initially, we want to share the organics piece of it and just the environmental impacts that landfilling has. So when materials that are considered organic go into a landfill, predominantly food and green waste especially, they will create methane, which is a greenhouse gas, and they will also create leachate, which is a groundwater contaminant. So we will cover those in the lesson as well. All right, so that's pretty much the content of lesson 1. And then in lesson 2, we're going to get a little bit into the terminology and technical language. So we will cover the principles and practices of waste reduction. We're going to start talking about how you categorize materials. We will look at a few more materials in depth, and we're going to start connecting our own personal use of materials and what categories they fit into, and how you would collect materials differently, or at least what kind of materials come in different residential, commercial. So we have resources again. We have a number of ongoing assignments, and one of the things we ask students to do is to start creating a fact worksheet and compiling data facts on recycling. We also ask students to look at items that they currently buy and dispose, and how and what are some of the aspects of that. Is there alternative products that could be purchased that are made of recyclable material, or that have less packaging, or that are created and produced more environmentally preferable? So we ask students to start diving in a little bit into the material types. And then what we're going to talk about is, how waste was created, and how do we handle things like products, packaging, food leftovers, landscape and agricultural byproducts in a system effectively. So again, we're going to talk about the SRM hierarchy: reduce, reuse, recycle, and ROT, because that is definitely a more common term. It wasn't part of the initial 3, but composting, or rotting as we refer to it, is basically the organics, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Basically, it's recycling of organics. So we include that in our hierarchy now. And it's a very important part of it, especially as we move to getting the very prevalent organic stream of material still being disposed. We like to share that there's lots of different ways to sort of to talk about the R's, and how we can use R's in different industries to really get people to rethink about disposal. We'll talk about waste reduction, or reduce, and how it's first in the hierarchy, and the things that you can do, like reducing packaging, purchasing policies, redesigning products, and if necessary, banning problematic products. And then we share some examples of waste reduction, including like xeriscaping and grass cycling, and using replacing light bulbs, not using disposable products, using clean-friendly products. And you might think, well, how does that relate to waste reduction? Well, when you're using products like this that are more natural and less toxic, what's really happening is you're eliminating a lot of the toxic and material disposal in the creation of those products. And then we're going to talk about reuse, and how there's lots of traditional aspects of reuse that we've sort of grown up with: thrift shops, repair shops, garage sales, but how reuse is really a modern day thing that we have access to in ways that we never used to, like eBay and Craigslist, and lots of neat ways to share resources with one another. Then we talk about recycling and composting, and how it's very important part of the process, because it's tangible. People like that feel-good recycling and knowing that they're doing something, so it's super important. And how it also saves resources. So when we recycle materials, we reduce energy consumption, we generally reduce water consumption, and lots of other savings associated with recycling as well. And that in composting, that is the organic portion of recycling. And there's lots of different things, but generally when organics are recycled, we do one of two things. We do either biodigestion, which oftentimes will happen, or methane capture type processes, which agricultural wastes are a big part of that. But then we can also do windrow composting and other forms of composting that can either be anaerobic or aerobic. So we'll go a little bit deeper into those types of processes for you. And then we ask students to come up with their own R other than reduce, reuse, recycle, and rot, and how it would help eliminate wasting, and what kind of infrastructure might be needed to put that into place. We share that a lot of times when we think of resources, we think of air, land, water, but in this class, we're going to be more focusing on materials management when we're referring to resources. So there's a difference, and that the importance is that we need to make that connection between these materials as being resources and having a value, because there is generally this perception that the things we're throwing away don't have a value, and that's why they're going into the trash. And we really want to change that mindset to rethink about those materials as resources with a value. And then I like to just share, there's a number of different ways that we look at how we categorize materials. This is one way that I generally use, coming more from a hauler perspective, is how different materials are collected. So when we look at materials collection, we generally collect packaging and containers separately from organics, separately from construction and building materials, separately from special waste and hazardous waste, and then we have bulky and electronic goods, universal waste collected differently, and reusables. So I like to look at materials kind of in these breakdown, and you'll see throughout that lesson that we kind of go into a detail as far as what's included in those materials. All right, and then we have another opportunity for the students to get involved in the conversation, and we want them to talk about something on their possession and what category does it fall into, back to these ones again, and what would be the best use for it after they're done with it. So again, we're going to keep drawing students back to their personal connection to this in the first couple classes, and then we really start breaking it into the detail of the communities and businesses. All right, so I'm going to take a quick breath and ask anybody if they have questions so far. So if you did want to raise your hand, or if you had something that you wanted to share, you could do that now. So I'm just going to pause for a second, and then we will move on to how we start to go into some of the historical aspects of waste management. All right, I don't see any hands going up, so we're going to go ahead and move along, and we'll take another break in a couple lessons. All right, so in this lesson, we are going to get into federal, state, and local laws and legislation that really have impacted resource management, both nationally, but predominantly we're going to be focused on California. So we will really look at key regulatory agencies in California and laws, the big one being 939, and then we're also going to talk about AB 341 and AB 1826 pretty extensively in this lesson. And then we're going to talk about some of the existing legislation and kind of get students starting to think about why that legislation was adopted and what was the historical importance of it. So I recommend watching another short video. It's a little bit older, but I like it. Gone Tomorrow, The Hidden Life of Garbage. There's a link to that. And then there's a number of links to historical articles on waste that are pretty interesting, as well as information on legislation and kind of the links to those pages that describe the legislation. One of the things that we list as homework assignment in this class is to actually have students research a piece of state legislation or local legislation and then report back to that in class, which is a great way just to share about some of them. And so we provide links in here where they can look for local and state legislation. And then this will also tie into the community and business capstone projects, and depending on which they're doing, they would want to look at some local legislation that is currently affecting businesses or their local community, and that will again tie back into the capstone project. So we go back and we give some of the historical perspective and talk about, early on how there is evidence of wasting, but that for the most part, we didn't really start seeing waste management practices a little bit in 500 BC early on with moving materials outside of the city area, but generally we didn't start seeing waste management practices until the industrial area revolution time, when there started to be lots of issues associated with disease and sanitary conditions within small towns where people started to congregate and live. So that's where we started seeing issues, and we'll talk about leading up to modern sanitary landfill in Fresno. And then we spend most of this lesson really talking about more of the current modern day legislation. So we talk about how in the 1950s we saw a huge increase in the amount of materials being disposed because of modern systems of obsolescence and consumer purchasing and marketing associated with getting people to buy more products and buy them more often. And not only that, but a lot of these products were now, had packaging, and they were made of different types of materials and synthetics and contained toxins and multiple types of materials. So we kind of talk about that transition and how that led to collecting materials differently. Instead of collecting them, you would burn some stuff in your backyard, but you would put the leftover food scraps out for, pig farmers, and you would definitely collect your metals separately because those were used prior for war efforts, and just kind of how all that changed, and we started commingling our garbage, and a lot of the issues associated with that commingling and throwing it in holes that didn't have, lining on them, so it started polluting the water and the air and the land. So we'll get into that, and then we talk about that transition back out of that into, looking at Earth and protecting it, and then we're going to cover just dozens of California pieces of legislation and policy. California has really been on the leading edge of aggressively looking at, the health of the environment and all of the things we've done, and we will talk about a lot of those bills. So this is a great lesson where you're really going to get to dive into California legislation and a lot of things that have been going on. We ask students to think about what are some of the key drivers for policy and get their input on that. We're also going to talk about local policies because a number of the policies related to sustainable resource management practices are not implemented at the state level. They really are local policies, and that's why we have the Community Capstone Project to bring in that aspect that a lot of what happens, a lot of the drivers happen at the local level, and how we really need that, that momentum happening locally if we're going to continue to make these great strides. We're going to talk about the agencies that manage many of these areas as well. All right, so then the next lesson we get into is collection systems. And in this lesson, we are going to talk about more of the actual operational aspects of collecting materials. Now, this lesson, I will say, is focused mostly on downstream. And in future lessons, we talk about the difference between upstream, which is prior to the point of consumption, and downstream. But this lesson is really going to focus on what happens to materials that are being disposed. And when I use the term disposed, I'm saying either disposed in a recycle bin, a compost bin, a metal bin, a trash bin. We're going to talk about the handling of those materials that then leave the user when they're done with them and what happens to them. So we'll talk about different systems for residential, commercial, industrial, how we categorize those materials, how we collect those materials, and what types of equipment are needed. There's a number of great videos in here that start showing about how this one from San Francisco actually on a collection system right here is a great one. It's like an 8-minute video, and it shows you all the different streams that are collected in San Francisco, and then we have lots of other articles related to that. We also start talking about what are some of the attacks on recycling and what are some of the responses to those. And then we ask students to look at how trash is handled in their own home. So it's an easy way to get them from, kind of thinking about it. Usually they put their trash in a can in the house, and then they take it out to a bin that goes out on the curb. But really thinking about, wait, how is material going, what are the systems in my house? Is it going from a bathroom trash can to another trash can? And what's being collected in different parts of the home? And how could I do things differently? And then what's happening with it when it's gone? So connecting those dots. We talk about how the collection systems generally fall into 3 categories: residential, commercial, and industrial. And then we talk about the considerations that need to be looked at when designing a collection system. Is, out of sight, out of mind. You think, oh, I just put it in a bin and it takes it, it gets taken away and it's gone. On the back end of that are a huge number of considerations and things to look at that really went into designing that system. How often are materials collected, or how often do they need to be collected? What are the different materials? Is it different in one part of the city versus another? Because residential material streams are much different than industrial, commercial. So how many separations do we want? What kind of bins do we need to collect it? That's going to be based on volume. It's going to be based on weight of the material. You can't very well collect, food waste in large bins because it's heavy. So things like that, you have to know the volume versus the weight of material. What kinds of collection vehicles are we going to use? Do we have narrow streets? Do we have high winding roads? Or are there aspects to the terrain in our community that will create variations from one city to another? Do we live in a dense area? Do we live in a more sprawled, spread out area? And then we obviously need to know what kind of local facilities we have. So a huge number of considerations that go into designing these. And so then we want students to talk about that. We want them, probably you'll have students that come from different cities, and so get them to share some of the information on how their residential collections operate, and then they can start talking about how those differ from one another and maybe why they differ. What are some of the things that went into that? Were considerations more community-based and, challenges, maybe implementing certain programs that came from the local level, not necessarily from the infrastructure level. So we really want to talk about those changes and differences and how they relate to diversion, how they relate to cost, and how they relate to ease of operation for the residents, because those are always key considerations when designing a system. Then we're going to ask students to talk about what are some alternatives to polystyrene recycling. In this lesson we show a case study, so they'll have gone through that case study and then they'll get to share what they think some of their ideas would be related to this. All right, so I'm going to pause really quick and see if we have any questions. Anybody would like to share anything before I move on? All right, we're going to go ahead and move ahead. So after collections, we talk about the Sustainable Resource Management System infrastructure. And this is going to be talking more about after collection facilities, and we'll get into that. So here we're going to talk about the different type of facilities needed, how materials are classified handled, processed, and sorted so that then they could be sold to secondary markets. We're going to look at the differences between landfilling and incineration, and just how we might modify sort systems. So the really cool thing about this, and as an instructor, you definitely want to get moving on this part of the class in advance, because what we would like is we would love for students to be able to tour a local material recovery facility, recycling center, compost facility, maybe a C&D facility, an e-waste facility. There's lots of local facilities, and we can actually help connect you to that as well. So you'll have my contact information, but we would like you to arrange to tour a facility kind of in conjunction with this lesson. And what we've done is we've outlined for you how you would request a tour of the facility and things that you would want to do before you do the tour, you know, like making a list of questions, prepare to video it, things that you would do during the tour, and things that you would do after the tour. So as a facilitator, you would obviously ask your students to do these things, but again, getting on this and making sure that you have this lined up to kind of coincide with the lesson would work the best. We also have a number of video links where you can watch how does a landfill work, how does a material recovery facility work, and resources on these that would be great for students to watch prior to going as well. So they, once they're at the tour, they kind of know what these different processes are that are happening. We have reading assignments, and one of them would just be to write a paper after the tour and some of the key findings, some of the things that they learned, personal insight. And then the lesson itself is going to go over the different types of infrastructure, you know, reuse centers, material recovery facilities needing compost and organics processing, C&D processing, problematic materials like household hazardous waste, electronics, transfer stations, and residual facilities. So we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about how, you know, how systems need to be adaptable to change, especially the seasonal variations. So for instance, we definitely know during the holiday season, you know, different types of materials going into the waste stream that can affect the processing of those materials. And then problematic materials, you know, plastic bags can be a real issue for sorting facilities, as can metal wires or Christmas lights, things like that. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then we are going to talk about some of the, you know, more challenging to handle materials and what might be some of the alternatives to those. We definitely are going to talk about landfilling and how in an SRM system, the goal really is to eliminate disposal as much as possible, and that, you know, landfills should only be used for the residue, and we should not be you know, directly hauling materials to landfill. There should be a number of processes that happen prior to that, including the waste reduction, reuse, and recycling, but, you know, processing and lots of other pieces that would go in to making sure that really what's going into the landfill are materials that don't have other avenues in an SRM system. All right, so then we're going to talk a little bit about commodities and markets, because that's a very important part of it. If we can collect all the material we want, but if ultimately we are not processing it, marketing it, and actually using it to create new materials, then we haven't truly recycled. And so we'll talk about issues of contamination. We'll talk about different processes that are used for sorting, and some of the factors that go into the amount of residual, because that is a huge part of the system, is the types of residuals and why residuals come out of recycling after the sorting process. A number of links again, and here we're going to try to link you into commodity and marketing resources. So in this, we start talking about having students research specific products and how they're made and how they could be made differently. There's also a component here associated with the Zero Waste Business Plan to have them look at. So by now, just so you know, at this point, they would have already identified a business that they're working with, that they're going to be focusing their Zero Waste Business Plan on. So at this point, we're just asking them to be working with that business to identify one of the materials currently being disposed that is problematic, and what are some of the things that the business might be able to do to eliminate that product or redesign it, or find other alternatives to it that wouldn't be wasteful. So this is definitely, as you can see, as we move through the Zero Waste Business and Community capstones both, we are creating a plan for a business and for a community that will provide them lots of details on how they can move to zero waste. So we talk about the difference between, collection of recyclables is not recycling. Diversion is not recycling. We need to use those recovered materials to make new products before it's recycling. And, all materials end up going through some sort of processing, and those facilities have a lot of different things that they look at in how they're designed and in how they operate. Is the goal to maximize diversion or maximize high value quality commodities? Very different things. Maximizing diversion means that you're pulling out all the recyclables, even those with a very low value. You generally get a much higher diversion rate. Whereas when you're designing facilities for commodity value, a lot of times there's recyclables that end up in the residual and being disposed because they don't have value. So we start sharing some of these intricacies with the students so that they understand the dynamics of that, and alleviate that misconception that once I put something in my recycle bin, it's recycled. That isn't always true. It really depends on the facilities, and more importantly, it depends on the contracts with those facilities and what they're contracted to do. So do you collect only marketable materials, or do you collect it all? Do you build a facility that uses more labor, more equipment? Do you look at operating costs versus capital costs, or not look at them, but do you focus more heavily on one versus the other? So we start talking about some of these dynamics with students. We talk about some of the best practices, like working with your end markets to make sure that you're really meeting their specs, that you're removing contaminants, that you're marketing materials for their highest and best use, because sometimes you can market material for different products, and you really want to make sure that you're working with facilities that are marketing for highest and best use. And then we're going to go into the details. I only have one slide here, but of a lot of different materials: paper, plastic, glass, aluminum, and we're going to share with students what types of things they can be recycled into and what are some of the environmental impacts of doing so. This is just one example of how we do that with aluminum. And we kind of share with students that, aluminum has a very high value. It's super easy to recycle. There's facilities everywhere, and yet such a small portion of it is being recycled. And then we talk about the impacts of recycling that aluminum and how it reduces emissions, how it creates a revenue stream, and all those things associated with it. All right, so we have 2 more lessons, which we will go through quickly. I just want to make sure that I stop here and see if anybody has any questions. All right, I don't see anything. So we're going to move on to the last 2 lessons that I'll be covering, which are waste auditing and then measurement and tracking. So I think this is probably one of the most fun components of the class, is that we will be doing a waste sort. And this is another thing that you would want to arrange with a school or a business in advance, because we will be doing the actual physical sort. So you can approach this from a couple of different ways. You can either arrange to do a waste sort on your campus of the school bins. You can arrange to do a waste sort with the business that you are using as your capstone project. So, or you can do both. This class, we provide all the tracking forms, and before you do the waste sort, this lesson basically walks everybody through how to do the waste sort and what types of things they're going to be looking for. So we have a number of different resources here, and like I said, we have all of the actual waste sort forms included. And then what we have for doing the waste sort is all of the things that you need to do. This does take some prepping. You can't just come into class and say, we're going to do a waste sort today. You will need to make sure that the students on the day you do the waste sort, come dressed appropriately, that, that you've got the items that you'll need to conduct it. So we kind of have a list here to prep you for the sort. Like I said, we have all of the forms, we have the conversion charts that the students will use. And then this lesson is basically going to give them the information up front. So why do we audit? How do you prepare for it? What do you do after you're done? How do you analyze the data? And then most of all, what do you do after you've done all this? So we talk about how the trash is sorted. We give lots of strategies for how you want to set up the sort area, what types of equipment you need, how people will be used, what type of bins, signage, what's the easiest way to do it so you're not bending over and breaking your back, what kind of materials you want to sort for. We talk about tracking results, so what kind of tracking works best and how you log it, how you measure it. Do you measure by weight? Do you measure by volume? I like to do both, but depending on what you have available to you that day. And then you go out and do the sort. So this is a really quick lesson, but that I just went over, but in the lesson itself, there's a lot of details on how you do the physical waste sort. And again, I think that when I taught this class, this was probably the most fun they had doing that. And then tracking and measuring. So this is data that then is going to be used in your capstone project to show what was found. So, what did you find? How do you measure it? How do you share that information? We're going to teach students how to calculate diversion rates because that's a simple first step that they need to know. So we will ask students to work in small groups to compile the data. So there's usually a number of different pieces of data you'll compile, so having them break into groups to do that. And we have some good activities in the workbook that walk students through how to calculate diversion and how to calculate zero waste diversion, and also how to do a right sizing activity. So these are also very interactive, fun activities for the students that you would want to do before they actually go do their own measurements and reports. So we share with them why measurement is important, how it measures the progress of your programs that you have in place, how it identifies new opportunities, how it can identify where programs may not be working, where you might need more education. It just helps you with information you need to analyze not only next steps, but what you're currently doing. We share about baseline and why it's important to identify a starting point for measurement. Then, as I told you, we share how to calculate diversion, and we share how to calculate zero waste diversion, which is different, and why we kind of break those out. We also do a right sizing activity for students, which is really fun. And this is more focused on showing students how to make sure that businesses have the correct level of service for both waste and recyclables, and why that's tied into a cost. And one of the things that we note is that many businesses are overpaying for service. And so, if you have a business that might be, I don't know if I really want to do recycling, I don't know if I'm interested in zero waste, it's going to cost me money. Well, this is one of those ways we can usually get you in the door, is if you can find cost savings for businesses, then you can usually get them interested and say, look, we can save you money, and let's use some of that money to do some of these other things that are going to be really beneficial, to you as a business. So it's a fun activity, and it's one that, as part of the capstone project, you would do with your zero waste business. Then we show you how to analyze the data and how to convert volumes of material into weights of material so that you have accurate weights. And then we show you how to basically put that information side by side and show how there's benefits associated with doing these activities. Here, this business shows a good cost savings, it shows an increase of recycling, it shows less bins on space, and it shows the next steps. So we have students work through that. We also show students how to look for opportunities in the data so that they can find materials that have the most volume, the most value, and the most toxic materials that we want to remove out of the remaining waste stream. And then we also want to look for those service gaps. So, you know, what are the things in there that we need to look at other opportunities for getting them out of our waste stream. We're going to provide a number of different tracking forms that students can use to show in a very aesthetically pleasing way the data and make it very understandable and how to look at it quickly. We're going to show students how to also use that data to look upstream, not just at how we can recycle more, but how we can eliminate materials from being disposed or recycled in the first place. And the reason we do that is because that piece is generally the highest cost savings for businesses in the first place, is if they can eliminate materials from ever being disposed or recycled. So we want to share that information. All right, I can't believe that we got through all 8 of those lessons, but that gives you an idea of what this course is going to focus on. And then again, as I said, we really dive a little bit deeper in the next 3 lessons to talk about some of the details. So that is our introduction to sustainable resource management and an overview of the curriculum. We're very excited to be offering this curriculum to community colleges throughout the state of California, and we look forward to having you in our upcoming webinars as well. So before I end, I want to just open up the floor. If anybody has any questions, comments that they would like to ask or share, we would go ahead and do that right now. I don't see anything. I'll give you another minute or 2. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we're going to have any questions, which is fine. But if you do have any questions, I'll send a follow-up email with my email address and contact information. Feel free to contact me any questions about the curriculum or the content. I appreciate you spending this hour with me, and we'll talk to you next week. All right, take care.